How has systemic racism and stereotyping led to continued injustice in society over time? And what are the biggest challenges facing the erasure of those biases? To answer these questions and more, we are joined by experts in racial justice and civil rights law. Lateefah Simon is the president of Akonadi Foundation, which works to end structural racism. Back in 2003, she was the youngest MacArthur Genius Grant recipient for her work helping break the cycle of poverty, violence, and incarceration. Deidre Jackson is the national director of the Black Youth Project 100, a national organization of Black youth activists focused on justice and freedom for all Black people. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
So my first question is for Lateefah. You worked with now Vice President Kamala Harris back when she was in the California system. What do you think it means for people to see a Black vice president of the country?
Sure. In working within District Attorney Harris, prior to working with her, my job was to be a disruptor and organizer of fighting against systems that didn't work for people that looked like me and that I cared about. I was a young executive director of a grassroots movement organization. And when then DA Harris hired me, she was clear that she was a Black woman coming into a system that was not made for her to lead it, and that we could slowly chip away at a broken system by developing programs that challenge drug war laws. Now, we mentioned Greensboro earlier in the program, and I think about that. It has been 60 years, almost 61 years since those brave movement builders did civil disobedience in that Woolworth. Very, very clear that it would take the action of freedom fighters to adjust, to reform a system, a nation that had not dealt with its original sin. Their mothers and fathers could not go and eat in a public institution. 60 years later, you have a Black woman walking into the White House, not as a guest, but as a second in command of the free world. Politicians are not prophets. We get an opportunity with this administration to push and to organize and hold them accountable to the values that they've announced that they'll hold dear. I love Vice President Harris. She was a dear mentor to me, but she has also been clear that it is our job on the ground to push the administration to continuously lift up the rights of real people, do the right thing, and ensure that those words that are listed on the Statue of Liberty hold true. So we still have a lot of organizing to do.
And the first civil rights movement you brought up 60 years ago, the freedom fighters, those were young people, those were college students who decided they want to make a difference. They saw a change that they knew they could make. Deidre, you founded a Dream Defenders chapter back when you were in college. How do you, have you seen any change about organizing and working with young people when you did that, when you first started and to now?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I was a grad student in FIU down in Miami, and I was attending school at the same time that Trayvon Martin and the non-indictment of George Zimmerman was happening. So I was in Florida, and just like many people my age, we were on social media watching what was happening. And I got connected to folks in Dream Defenders and immediately joined and began organizing from there. I moved to North Carolina and immediately began organizing across the state, working specifically with young Black students. North Carolina has more historically Black institutions for higher learning. I'm an HBCU alum of Cheyney University. And so it was critical for me to be able to organize across the state for many different issues that Black students at different schools, not just at the HBCUs, but also at the predominantly white institutions were facing in terms of institutional racism and harassment by the campus police.
And when it comes to young people, obviously, not only are they active in organizing in grassroots foundations, they're also increasingly important at the ballot box, at the polls. And we saw in Georgia how young Black voters made a difference. So when working with young people, and this is for both of you, what do you center on when it comes to, driving them to the polls and importance of voting?
Go ahead, sister. You go first.
Yeah. I mean, I think that young people recognize and see on multiple levels the intersections of what we are experiencing. Being Black, being a woman, being poor, being queer, and all of the ways that we are in proximity to oppression, and not in the proximity of power. We have different ways of viewing what is happening around us, and in developing strategies that make the most sense for those that are sitting at the margins of our community. So Black people in this country historically have sat at the margins in many different ways. And even within our Black communities, there are folk that are also more at the margins. And so how do we bring the stories and solutions of what's happening with them into the work that we are doing, so that those folks can be centered, we can continue to be centered in what we're doing, and that we have fuller solutions and fuller strategies of getting at what we're trying to do. Voting is one way. It is a tool that we use, and it is very important. And there's many other ways that we want to really be in building power to be able to make decisions over our lives.
That's right.
And then
when you speak, it's encouraging, and also understanding that the movement leaders of today will be making the decisions for the nation and our well-being, in years to come. Young people just don't go to the polls. There has been a very sophisticated movement in this country for decades to take back power, or to take power. We actually see more Black young mayors all over the country, in cities like Baltimore, recently Stockton, San Francisco. These are Black folks who were raised in public housing and raised by single mothers, who were trained not only as organizers, but as young academics and policymakers, insistent that we can march and organize and disrupt. But until we have the power at the dais to make decisions that deeply affect the people that we love most, we are going to continue to beg rogue politicians to shift and change the dynamics of our communities. So the work that BYP 100 is doing and Dream Defenders are doing, they are literally laying down a democratic framework that asks us to be not only our best, but to live up to what has been oftentimes a failed promise to young Black and brown people in this country. They have organized tens of thousands of young people per city all over the country to demand that their cities, that their counties, and that their states look different. So thank you, sister, for your work.
Thank you.
Of course, and I think the underlying topic of what we've talked about not only is equality, but equity. And I think when we talk about advancing equity within communities, I think that's where divisions start to happen and people don't understand as much. So how would you, who work to organize Black people and work for the betterment of Black Americans, how would you define, or what does equity look like to you? And then what do you think is important for people to know when it comes to social justice?
Want to take it?
No, you go.
And I'll respond after.
Okay. So for me in BYP 100, something that is in our mission is that we fight for Black liberation and freedom. And for me, what that looks like is having permanently organized communities. We need to be able, especially what the pandemic has taught us, is that we need the people that are closest to us in order to get to the safety that we want, to get to the better well-being of our cities, and also to try to fight against the rapid gentrification that is pushing Black people out of their homes and into wherever, because we also have this economic disaster that we're facing with the increase of job loss and young Black people, right? We have the most student debt, and we end up having to do jobs that pay the least. And so our economic situation, to say the least, for young people is not set up for us to really succeed. And so the strategies that we're trying to develop and in thinking about the liberation and freedom that we dream of how can we be in more conversations and in more discussions about building power and about making decisions, but also what does it mean to be safe? And what does it mean to be organized in our communities? We need people to know that they can go to their city councilmen and their mayors and advocate for something, and that we also need to be able to learn to know how to how to get a stop sign on our streets. And so it's the small, slow work that needs to happen in order to really achieve even something past equity. There's something more on the other side of this, and I think equity serves its purpose, and it isn't the North Star. It has never been the North Star, right? And so what we are trying to do is something different. And we are in the place of really trying to reconcile with the folks that are really making decisions over our lives, including our safety. And this big push over the summer was around defunding the police. It was what we were calling for. It was what young Black people across this country were yelling. And what that means is not just about getting rid of the police so that we can have chaos. It's actually about what are some ways that we already keep each other safe that don't involve the police. And with the increases of their budgets and the decreasing of, we have climate disaster. I mean, look at Texas, and their police just got a huge budget. And so we're really in the business of intervening and interrogating what the decision makers really see as valuable, and trying to make people see that our communities are the most valuable things we have.
I think those examples are extremely important. And if I could just, we're at time?
Yeah, just quickly.
Oh, well, again, hopefully in this moment, representing philanthropy. Now I'm on the other side of the table. Our job is to fund movement leaders. If you had an opportunity to fund a young Rosa Parks and, hundreds of young college students to advance what we think is possible, not only in terms of integration, but a free society that moves beyond equity, we would do that. Why aren't we funding movement leaders and organizations like BYP 100 to express and also to activate what racial healing could look like beyond this moment? Last thing, our hero, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, talked about the power of recognizing this moment and brought up HR 40. We have to meet this moment by acknowledging the original sin of this nation and address the wrongs and make it right. This is the apex moment. We have the leadership, we have young people on the ground, we have philanthropy, hopefully here to be more courageous, to fund the civil and human rights movement of 2021. We can and we will heal this nation if we listen to the power, righteousness, and pragmatic approach to shift and change and meet it with a liberation format. We have what we need to reach a new day in this country.
Well, thank you both so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.